Today we wanted to talk about why is the colonizer still very popular in Kenya, despite all the abuses and all the criminal activities that they did during the colonial dictatorship that lasted until 1963. Now, in this image, you can see two cabinet ministers who belong to the Kenya government, and the Mzungu lady is the British ambassador to Kenya. And you can see how much joy is in the African men because they are right next to their foreign master. And when I saw this picture, I was struck by the fact that African men appear determined to forget their history, to forget the horrific history that we've had with the masteries, the Mzungus as they call themselves. Now, ever since Africans or Kenyans came into contact with the British about 100 years ago, it's been a disaster for us. Nothing good came from it. And the fact that this lady, who is the British foreign ambassador in Kenya, is still very popular is quite disturbing. And it fills someone with a lot of sadness, because it means that the relationship between the slave and his master is still the same. And you can see how much joy they have just to be next to their foreign master. And these are cabinet ministers. These are not just ordinary people. These are cabinet ministers. And they're spending their free time with the British ambassador. And what you'll notice is that you'll never see any cabinet minister in Kenya seeking to associate with the ambassador of Zimbabwe to show solidarity with Zimbabwe, which is under British and American sanctions. No, you'll never see that. You'll never see cabinet ministers in Kenya associating with representatives of the West Papuan freedom movement, because the people of West Papua are really going through a genocide at the hands of the Indonesian military, who calls them monkeys. So you'll never see African cabinet ministers from Kenya showing any sort of association with any African freedom movement. For example, the issue of racism in Tunisia is appalling. It really is appalling. Tunisia is like the way America was towards people of African origin in the 1950s. They practice an apartheid that is rarely spoken about. And you'll never see any cabinet minister showing any kind of association with the anti-racism activists from Tunisia, because about 15% to 20% of the Tunisian population is Africans. The rest of them are Europeans who speak Arabic, right? So you'll never see solidarity across Africa being shown by African ministers in Kenya, or government ministers in Kenya, or government representatives of Kenya towards any kind of freedom movement. And this has been the situation for a long time, because even during the anti-apartheid struggle, the government of Kenya supported the apartheid government. Never forget, they never supported the freedom fighters, which is why Mandela never bothered to come to Kenya, in case you didn't know. And a lot of the anti-apartheid fighters who were based in Tanzania were hunted down by the Europeans from bases in Kenya. They were operating from Kenya to identify and arrest and assassinate the anti-apartheid fighters who were based in Tanzania and sometimes Zambia and Zimbabwe. So this has been a very long-standing culture of Kenyans to support the Mzungu at any cost, and at the cost of other African or other black people globally. So this image is really sad, because we thought that with time and with education and with people getting exposed, that this sort of colonial mindset would die. But you can clearly see it's very much alive and well. Every single time a new generation takes over power, we always hope that the relationship will change, that they'll stop acting so much like slaves. But nothing appears to change it. And this is very dismaying. So you can see these two cabinet ministers, you can see how much joy they are finding in their foreign master. So that is the elite. The elite loves the Mzungu, right? We all know that. What about ordinary Kenyans? Do they still love the Mzungu? Yes, they absolutely love the Mzungu. And nothing appears to be able to shake or change that relationship. And you can see from these pictures, you can clearly see that one of the main biggest dreams that an African girl can have is to get married to a Mzungu who's supposed to be better than an African, and so on and so forth. That's their ultimate dream. And in fact, when you consider and analyze the marriage rates amongst the Kenyan diaspora abroad, you'll realize that majority of the girls who go abroad refuse to marry Kenyan men, opting to marry foreign men or Mzungu men. but their desirability to the Mzungu is very, very low. So the marriage rates amongst Kenyans in the diaspora is extremely low. In fact, majority of the girls, of the women, never get married because they do not want to marry a Kenyan man. They want a Mzungu. They want the pink master, but the pink master doesn't want them. So they age out of marriage. So if you go to any country where Kenyans are in the diaspora, you'll realize that majority of the girls or the women are not married and will never get married. And the Kenyan men either have to come back to Kenya and try and import wives or simply not get married. So that's the tragedy of this self-rejection. Because the Mzungu, when you're children and you go to school, the government, which controls the curriculum, which is written in England, by the way, one of the things they trained us or they taught us is that the Mzungu is God. So you go to something called Christian religious studies and they tell small children that the Mzungu is in fact God, and they give them paintings and cartoon pictures of a Mzungu, and they tell you that is God or the son of God or something like that, which is an absolute outrage, right? So, and then the same children are taken to church, to a Christian church, and they're shown statues of Europeans posing as angels, posing as saints. Can you imagine a Mzungu claiming to be a saint? Think about that. Claiming to be God himself. And the education system in Kenya is not education, it's propaganda. It's white supremacist propaganda, right? And so once that is solidly locked into the brain of children, they grow up worshipping the Mzungu as both their master and also their God. So that when they're praying in their mind, when they're praying to a Mzungu. So that the enemy, their worst enemy in history, also becomes their God. And so, and as you go to church, they tell you that he's a good God. Which one? The Mzungu one. That's a good God. And the confusion that is brought about by religion, the confused identities that most Africans have, manifest in the continued love and adoration of the Mzungu. So this is the situation. So you can see the women want to get married to the Mzungu. You can see this other girl. She actually went out to the streets. She went to a part of Nairobi where there's a lot of foreign presence, and she put up her sign demanding to be married to a Mzungu. She wanted to make it very clear that she's discriminating against African men. She wants to be married to God, because the Mzungu is the equivalent of God in the brains of most Kenyans, right? So she put up her sign, and it ended up in the media. And just think what a pathetic display of self-hatred that this image represents. And then remember that this other guy, some kind of comedian, who also put up a sign demanding to meet his hero, who was of course a Mzungu. You can see in this picture. And this is a young man, and this is in 2022. You'd think that with time the situation would change. It never changes, right? It never changes. The African man wants to worship his Mzungu master. The African woman wants to marry her Mzungu master. That is it. So this young man is still sucking up to the Mzungu, declaring the way this Mzungu is his hero. I want you to think about that. You can't get if you just do a very simple poll in the street, stop people in the street of any city or town in Kenya and ask them, who's your hero? They'll tell you Mzungu, one Mzungu or another. Just think how pathetic that is, that the education system has eroded so much of our history that our young people identify with their worst enemy as their hero. You'll never see a young African man saying that my hero is, for example, Kandake Amanirenas, who fought against both Julius Caesar and Octavian Caesar and defeated them, right? They don't know that history because that is simply not taught. They are never taught anything. In the school system, you're never taught anything about African heroes. So that when these children grow up, it is the Mzungu who is presented as a hero. The Mzungu is presented as superhuman, so they know all about Superman, a Mzungu. I don't know, Spider-Man, another Mzungu, who can do a lot of physical feats, yet when you go into an actual boxing ring, they cannot pull that off in real life. But these characters, these Western characters, are presented to our children as the heroes. So they grow up just groveling and worshipping the Mzungu, which is what this guy also put up a sign, was saying that the Mzungu is his hero. And there's no difference between him putting up this sign and the other Africans who bow down and worship European statues in different churches. Grown men worshipping, a Mzungu statue. It's no different from when you go to the University of Nairobi. They have a statue of Gandhi that every year they do a ceremony towards, a worship ceremony, and they bow down to that statue and they worship it. But you'll never see them bowing down to a statue of an African, any African, or doing any ceremony for any African. Why would an African in Kenya not say that, Emperor, why would they not say that Emperor Menelik, who defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa, is the hero? Because that information is simply absent from the school system. In this other image, you can see this African man. This is a grown African man, right? And you can see he's celebrating his Mzungu wife. And this is not top of the shelf Mzungu woman. This is an overweight, shapeless, not very attractive Mzungu woman. But you can see the way he's looking at her, as if he's looking at some kind of God from heaven, some kind of angel from heaven. Just look, this is a grown African man celebrating the colonizer, finding a lot of joy in the colonizer. Think how pathetic this looks. Self-hatred at the highest level. So, and when you look at such images, they represent the general feeling of the society. And it shows how hopeless the situation actually is for us in 2022. Because if he's importing his wife, a Mzungu wife, it means he also wants a Mzungu car, Mzungu clothes, Mzungu everything. Now, what does that mean practically? It simply means that he will reject anything that is locally manufactured. I'm telling you. If he was to go to a supermarket and he was to see chicken imported from France versus chicken presumably made in Kenya, he will reject the chicken that is made in Kenya and buy the frozen chicken that has been imported from France. Yes, chicken is imported from France in Kenya. Even coffee is imported from England. And we are the ones who grow coffee. But they will always pick up a British brand of Kenyan coffee so that the money always ends up with the Mzungu. So there's an economic implication to this self-hatred. It has consequences on the GDP, because when the population is rejecting itself and is refusing to manufacture anything and is refusing to buy anything that is locally made, opting for imported products, it means that this population loses a lot of wealth by importing things that they can manufacture themselves. So this contributes to the poverty in the country. So the self-hatred is a very big contributor to the poverty in the country. Without manufacturing, without industrialization, a country can never become rich. And so what this image of this African man worshipping his Mzungu woman represents, it represents worsening poverty for the nation. In this other situation, I don't even know what to say. This is a very young African man marrying a very old Mzungu. So that the value of the old Mzungu is higher than a very young African woman that he could get and marry. That he's opting to go for this because that is still seen as a prize. Can you imagine? Taking the garbage of another society and pretending that it is something valuable. Can you imagine? Getting married to something that is almost a corpse. But these are the modern African men that we have. This is a typical Kenyan man. Any Kenyan man can do this shamelessly. We almost have no patriots left in the country. After 50 years of brainwashing and propaganda by the government, for us to regard the Mzungu as our best friend, as our master, as our God, as our benefactor, this is the result. This is shameless. Now, Dedan Kimathi died fighting for independence so that this guy can pull this stunt. Dedan Kimathi died for our independence so that the two cabinet ministers can be smiling and spending all their free time with the British ambassador to Kenya. He must be turning in his grave. We can't even find the grave. So we can conclude and say that the African man in Kenya, the African woman in Kenya in 2023 loves his Mzungu master. And they find a lot of joy being next to their Mzungu master. This is very sad, but this is the situation that we have.